right, today I'm going to show you something that you don't see every day. This is an affidavit of arm's length transaction. So I am involved in a short sale transaction, and my client in this case is the buyer. And so we're getting close to closing. And one of the things that the lenders will send out, lenders meaning the lender that is being shorted as a part of the transaction. So this is the seller's lender that's taking a haircut on their loan in order to transact and close the transaction. They send out these affidavits of arm's length transactions. So, and they want all parties to sign this before we close. And I'm going to show you a quick peek as to what this looks like so you can see it. So this is what they look like. In this case, this is from Freedom Mortgage. That's the name of the seller's lender that's being shorted in this transaction. And I've redacted the address, for privacy reasons, but I wanted to show you the rest of it. And the whole idea of this arm's length transactions, you're going to see here in a minute, is that they want to be sure that this is a what they consider an arm's length transaction, meaning that the buyer and seller do not have any kind of relationship with one another. They're not in business together. And the idea there is because they want to make sure that they're getting fair market value, and that someone didn't get into financial trouble and then just short sell their house to their brother or their sister or aunt or uncle or something like that. So this is how it reads. The first point here is the purchase and sale agreement. Purchase and sale transaction reflected in the agreement is an arm's length transaction, meaning that the transaction has been negotiated by unrelated parties, each of whom is acting on his or her own self-interest, and that the sale price is based on fair market value of the property. With respect to those persons signing this affidavit as an agent for either sellers, buyers, or both, those agents are acting in the best interest of their respective principals. So they want to make sure that the buyer doesn't know the seller doesn't know the buyer, the brokers don't have any collusion or any kind of ulterior motives in the transaction, but they're just representing their clients in the purchase of a property, and the listing brokers representing the seller and their interest in selling the property. No buyer or agent of buyer's agent is a family member or business associate of the seller or borrowers or the mortgagees. So they want to make sure there's no family relationships going on in here in this transaction. No buyer or agent or buyers share a business interest with the seller or the borrowers of the mortgagee. So there's no business affiliations with one another. There are no hidden terms or hidden agreements or special understandings between the seller and the buyer or among their respective agents, which are not reflected in the agreement or escrow instructions associated with the transaction. So, no one's going to give, somebody else money after closing, or, some kind of special terms or anything like that. Everything that's being transacted between buyer and seller is in the purchase and sale agreement. Otherwise, people could come up with special agreements and hey, I'll work hard to sell my house for even less if you, after we close, we give you, $10,000 bonus. Or, they want to make sure that none of that stuff is happening in a part of these transactions. There is no agreement, whether oral, written, or implied, between sellers and buyers and or their respective agents, which allows the sellers to remain in the property as tenants or to regain ownership of the property at any time after the consummation of the sale. So that of course could be additional terms that would have a negative effect on sales price, or there could be other positive benefits to the seller if that was the case. So hey, I'll sell the house to you for $10,000 less as long as you let me stay here for 6 months. That's not part of the deal. The sellers shall not receive any proceeds from the sale of the property reflected in the agreement. So the seller is doing a short sale. The bank is taking a shortfall on the loan in order to make the sale happen. In order for the short sale to be approved, the bank is taking this haircut, knowing that the seller is not getting a single cent from the sale of the transaction. The seller's motivation is to sell the property, get out from underneath the mortgage, and be able to move on with their lives. but they can't benefit from the short sale transaction other than just being out from underneath the property and out from underneath the mortgage and selling the property. They cannot receive any kind of proceeds at closing. No agent either the seller or the buyer shall receive any proceeds from this transaction except as reflected in the final escrow estimated closing statement, which shall be provided to lender for approval prior to the close of escrow. So compensation for both buyer broker and seller broker is disclosed on the settlement statement. They know how much the brokers are getting paid. There's no outside side agreements or anything like that going on. Each signatory of this affidavit expressly acknowledges that lenders relying upon this representation made herein as consideration for discounting the payoff of the loan, which are secured by the deed of trust mortgage encumbering the property. So relying on the fact that everybody's telling the truth here, that they understand fully the entire agreement between buyer and seller, that there's no anything outside of what's in the purchase and sale agreement going on here, or any kind of outside affiliations that they should otherwise be aware of. And then last, each signature of this affidavit expressly acknowledges that any misrepresentation made by him or her may subject him or her to civil liability. I declare under penalty and perjury under the laws of the state of Washington, all the statements made in this affidavit are true and correct. So then it goes on here, and there is place for the seller to sign and get notarized. There is a place for the buyer to sign and get notarized. And then there's a back page that has for the listing broker and buyer broker. So everybody that's a party of the transaction has to, buyer seller and buyer broker and seller broker all have to acknowledge and sign off that this is true and correct. So I just thought that was something cool to share, something that happens behind the scenes before a closing of the transaction, of a short sale transaction, and not something that you see every day. So if you enjoyed it, if you have any questions at all about real estate related topics, I always love to hear from clients and potential clients and people that just need real estate help. My cell phone is 206-949-3793. We'll talk to you soon.